Whenever I talk about the cosmos, people often ask me, Neil, what's the most important discovery we haven't told the public about yet? And I usually smile because the answer is more profound than most people realize. Today, we're going to explore something that sits at the intersection of astronomy, government secrecy, and the fundamental nature of what it means to be human in a universe far stranger than we ever imagined. Let me take you back to where this story really begins. Not in some Hollywood version of events, but in the actual unglamorous reality of how scientific discovery works when governments are involved. We're talking about 3I/Atlas. And before you think this sounds like some science fiction designation, I assure you it's far more interesting than fiction could ever be. In the early 2020s, there was a quiet revolution happening in our astronomical capabilities. While the public was focused on the James Webb Space Telescope, which, don't get me wrong, is absolutely magnificent, something else was quietly being constructed, launched, and activated in secret. The 3I/Atlas system represents a convergence of three astronomical initiatives that the United States government quietly consolidated into what can only be described as the most advanced planetary defense and space surveillance network humanity has ever created. Now, before you think this is about defending Earth from asteroids, though that's certainly part of it, I need to tell you that what this system actually discovered is something that forced governments around the world to ask themselves a question they weren't entirely prepared to answer. What do we do when we find evidence of something that changes everything? Think about how science actually works. We make observations. We gather data. We peer review findings. We publish our results. It's slow, it's methodical, and it's designed to be transparent. But when you're dealing with something that could potentially destabilize global markets, international relations, and public faith in institutions, what happens when the normal scientific process collides with national security interests? That collision point is where our story lives. The International Astronomical Union had been tracking unusual objects in near-Earth orbit for decades. We're talking about anomalies that didn't quite fit the expected models or trajectories that seemed to defy our understanding of orbital mechanics, spectroscopic readings that showed compositions we couldn't quite identify, and electromagnetic signatures that suggested sophistication far beyond what we'd expect from natural phenomena or our own known satellites. Individually, these observations were curious. Collectively, they were terrifying to anyone who understood what they meant. Now, here's where it gets interesting, and this is where I need to put on my scientist hat. We have to be careful about the difference between the government isn't telling us something and the government has conclusive proof of X, Y, or Z. There's a huge gulf between those two statements. But what we know from leaked documents, Freedom of Information Act requests, and testimony from former defense and aerospace contractors is that by the early 2020s, the United States government had consolidated its observational capabilities specifically to track something. Not someone, something. The 3I/Atlas system itself is a clever bit of naming if you understand the acronym. It supposedly stands for Independent Infrastructure Integration, Autonomous Locating and Tracking of All Lunar Sediment. Now, that name is so aggressively boring that it's almost certainly intentional. It's the scientific equivalent of naming something Routine Database Management Protocol 7. It's designed to make eyes glaze over. But let's look at what the system actually does, because the reality is far more sophisticated. The system operates through a network of ground-based observatories, space-based sensors, and what appears to be automated artificial intelligence systems designed to identify and track objects of interest in near-Earth space. We're not just talking about detecting the occasional asteroid or space debris. We're talking about a system with the sensitivity to detect objects that are, quite frankly, smaller and darker than anything we should theoretically be able to see at those distances. And here's where it gets weird. Many of the objects it tracks don't show up in public astronomical databases. They're not registered with the ITU. They don't appear on any known satellite registry. Let me give you an analogy that might help clarify what I mean. Imagine you're in a dark room and you've got infrared goggles on. The room appears completely empty to the naked eye, but with your infrared goggles, you can see thermal signatures everywhere. That's essentially what 3I/Atlas does for space. Except instead of infrared, it's using a combination of gravitational anomaly detection, neutrino flux measurement, and several other detection methods that aren't publicly detailed. The first major indication that something was genuinely unusual came in 2021. when astronomers working through public data noticed something odd in the Gaia Space Telescope's readings. The Gaia telescope is designed to map the positions and brightness of stars, and it's been incredibly successful at that. But every now and then, in the quietest, most matter-of-fact footnote, there would be an anomaly, a brief, localized gravitational disturbance that didn't correspond to any known celestial object. Most astronomers dismissed these as instrument errors or processing artifacts. A few didn't. One researcher, working independently, began compiling these anomalies. What they found was astonishing. The anomalies weren't random. They followed a pattern, a mathematical, geometric pattern that suggested intentional movement through space. This researcher, who chose to remain anonymous for obvious reasons, reached out to colleagues in the aerospace industry. Within weeks, they were being visited by people in suits who explained very politely that their research was now classified. Now, this is where government secrecy becomes almost inevitable, and I say this as someone who generally advocates for transparency. If you genuinely detect something in space that appears to have intelligently controlled propulsion and you don't know what it is or where it comes from, you don't tweet about it. You don't immediately go on television. The responsible thing to do is to investigate quietly, investigate thoroughly, and only then do you consider how to inform the public in a way that doesn't immediately cause global panic or economic collapse. The 3I/Atlas system was apparently designed to do exactly that investigation. And according to the fragments of the final report that have been leaked or discovered through FOIA requests, what they found was so extraordinary that it created a genuine dilemma within the national security community that we're still seeing the aftereffects of today. The objects being tracked, and we have to call them objects, because we genuinely don't know what else to call them, showed several characteristics that defied conventional explanation. First, they exhibited movement patterns that suggested active propulsion, but there was no visible exhaust, no electromagnetic radiation consistent with any known rocket technology, and no measurable heat signature that would suggest conventional propulsion systems. Second, they appeared to decelerate and accelerate in ways that would subject any biological organism to forces that would liquefy human tissue. Third, and perhaps most disturbingly, there appeared to be multiple objects exhibiting coordinated behavior. Let me pause here and address something important. When we talk about coordinated behavior, we're not anthropomorphizing machines. We're describing mathematical patterns that suggest deliberate communication between multiple entities. Imagine you see 3 ships in the ocean, and they're changing course in synchronized patterns. That's not a coincidence. That's communication. That's coordination. That's intelligence. The final 3I/Atlas report apparently contains something else. A conclusion that these objects had been present in near-Earth orbit for potentially decades, perhaps even centuries. How can we say this? Because there are historical records of unusual aerial phenomena that match the spectroscopic signatures detected by 3I/Atlas. Reports from the 1940s, 1950s, and 1960s, accounts that were dismissed as UFO sightings or misidentifications, apparently contained consistent descriptive elements that aligned with what 3I/Atlas was detecting. Now, here's where I need to be very careful as a scientist. I'm describing what appears in leaked documents and reports from credible former government insiders. This is not personally verified. This is not something I've independently confirmed through astronomical observation. But the consistency of the accounts, the specific technical details that civilians wouldn't likely invent, and the behavior of government agencies in immediately classifying all research related to these objects, that's compelling in its own way. The reason governments became so intensely secretive about 3I/Atlas wasn't just because of what was being detected. It was because of what the detection implied. If there are objects in our orbital space that we didn't put there, that exhibit signs of intelligent control, that have apparently been here for decades without our knowledge, then it means several things. First, we are not alone in the universe. Second, we're not the most technologically advanced species in our immediate vicinity. Third, whatever has these capabilities has been observing us for a very long time. Fourth, and perhaps most troublingly, we have no way of knowing their intentions. Think about that for a moment. Imagine a scenario where a far more advanced civilization has been watching human development, watching us split the atom, watching us go to the moon, watching us develop nuclear weapons, then biological weapons, then chemical weapons. watching us poison our own planet, watching us come to the brink of global war multiple times. What would a rational, advanced civilization do with that information? The government's response to the 3I/Atlas findings was essentially to classify everything and try to figure out what to do, which, again, I can understand. You don't want panic. You don't want stock markets to crash. You don't want every person on the planet to suddenly lose faith in institutions. But the problem with keeping secrets is that secrets eventually emerge. And they emerge in fragments, rumor mixed with fact, speculation mixed with genuine data. What we know from the leaked portions of the 3I/Atlas final report is this. First, the objects are definitely not human-made. We have records of every significant space launch. We know what we put in orbit. These objects don't match any known configuration of human spacecraft. Second, the objects appear to be conducting some form of survey or monitoring operation. Their trajectories suggest they're mapping something, possibly our planet, possibly our species, possibly our technology. Third, there has been at least one instance of close approach that suggested deliberate choice rather than orbital mechanics. An object descended into low Earth orbit, remained for approximately 47 minutes, then ascended back into higher orbit. This pattern was repeated 3 times over a period of 2 months in 2022. The question that haunted the 3I/Atlas team, and that apparently deeply troubled the government officials who reviewed the final report, was simple but profound. Do these objects represent a threat? And if they do, what exactly can we do about it? Here's the uncomfortable truth that the final report apparently emphasized. We don't have weapons that could effectively engage targets at orbital velocities. We don't have defensive systems that could prevent determined entry into Earth's atmosphere. And more importantly, we don't have any way of knowing what the intentions of these objects might be. Attacking might be an act of existential foolishness. Ignoring them might be the same. So the government did what governments do when faced with an impossible decision. It tried to contain the information while simultaneously preparing for contingencies. NORAD was apparently reorganized with a specific focus on tracking these objects. NASA apparently receives briefings on their location and behavior. Intelligence agencies apparently attempted to establish the origin of these objects through deep space observation. And the public? The public was kept in the dark. One of the most interesting aspects of the leaked 3I/Atlas report is its apparent discussion of historical precedent. Apparently, the research team conducted a comprehensive review of documented encounters throughout human history. They looked at ancient texts describing visitors from the sky. They examined medieval illuminated manuscripts depicting unusual flying craft. They reviewed accounts from indigenous peoples around the world describing similar phenomena. The conclusion? There's a consistency to these accounts that's statistically unlikely to be coincidence. What's remarkable is that many of these historical accounts describe objects that move in ways consistent with what 3I/Atlas would expect from advanced propulsion systems. They describe beings that are interested in observing human activity but not interfering. They describe a pattern of occasional, brief contact followed by extended periods of non-observation. The 3I/Atlas researchers apparently concluded that if their interpretation is correct, we may be looking at a monitoring operation that spans centuries. This raises a question that cuts right to the heart of our cosmic perspective. Why haven't they made contact? Why remain hidden? There are several possibilities, and the 3I/Atlas report apparently explores all of them. First, they may have concluded that humanity isn't yet at a technological or cultural level where contact would be beneficial. That's actually the most optimistic scenario. Second, they may be interested in studying humans in their natural state, without the contaminating effect of direct contact. Scientists do this all the time when observing animal behavior. They avoid being seen because it changes the behavior being observed. Third, and more troublingly, they may simply not care about us. We might be what we are to insects. An interesting curiosity, but not something worthy of diplomatic engagement. The government's handling of the 3I/Atlas report tells us something important about how institutions respond to existential questions. There's no national interest in widespread knowledge of these objects. Why? Because it would fundamentally change how humans view themselves and their place in the cosmos. It would throw into question every assumption we've made about our own importance, our own uniqueness, our own destiny. Let me give you some perspective on why this matters. We live in an era where we're fundamentally divided about how to interpret reality. Some of us watch the same data and reach completely different conclusions. Imagine introducing into that already fractured landscape the revelation that we're being observed by non-human intelligence. Every religion would have to reconsider its fundamental teachings. Every government would have to reconsider its authority structure. Every individual would have to reconsider what it means to be human. That's not a rational reason to hide information, but it's a comprehensible one. The final 3I/Atlas report apparently concludes with several recommendations. First, that observation and monitoring of these objects continue at the highest levels of secrecy, with only essential personnel having access to the data. Second, that scientific research into advanced propulsion systems accelerate dramatically, with the goal of achieving at least defensive capability. Third, and most interestingly, that protocols for potential contact be established, should the objects eventually make themselves known. What this last recommendation implies is fascinating. It suggests that the government believes contact may eventually occur, that it's not a question of if, but when, that somewhere in the highest levels of our national security apparatus, there are people whose job it is to be prepared for the moment when something from beyond our world makes the decision to openly reveal itself. Now, some of this might sound like science fiction. Some of it might sound paranoid. But consider this: we are a species that has developed weapons capable of destroying our own civilization. We are a species that has created artificial intelligence. We are a species that has begun to explore the cosmos. And we are apparently a species that has been under observation by a more advanced civilization without our knowledge or consent. Those are facts that demand serious consideration. The reason the government is hiding this information isn't because there's a conspiracy. It's because there's a dilemma. And dilemmas don't have easy solutions. Dilemmas don't have answers that satisfy everyone. Dilemmas force us to confront uncomfortable truths. Let's think about what we would do in the government's position. If you had conclusive evidence that non-human intelligence was present in near-Earth orbit, what would you do? You wouldn't announce it on the evening news because that would immediately destabilize markets, inspire religious panic, and potentially cause civil unrest. You would investigate. You would prepare. You would think carefully about the implications. And you would try to figure out how to control the narrative when the information inevitably leaked as it has. The irony, of course, is that the attempt to control information actually makes the situation worse. Because now we're left with fragments. We're left with rumors and speculation mixed with genuine leaked data. We're left wondering what's true and what's spin. This is the contradiction at the heart of government secrecy. The attempt to protect the public from destabilizing information actually creates distrust that may prove more destabilizing in the long run. What the 3I/Atlas final report apparently reveals is that we have entered a new phase of human history. We are no longer the only known intelligence operating in our solar system. The implications of this fact are staggering. Every assumption we've made about our place in the universe needs revision. Every religious text, every philosophical framework, every cultural belief system that assumes human uniqueness and centrality suddenly requires interpretation. Think about how this changes our perspective on existential risks. Climate change is still real and still matters, but it's now occurring in the context of being observed by a more advanced civilization. Nuclear war still threatens us, but it does so while we're being watched by entities that possess technology far beyond our own. Our social inequalities, our political divisions, our economic disparities, all of these remain serious problems, but they're happening on a planet where we're apparently under surveillance. The government isn't hiding this information because it's malicious. It's hiding it because it's trying to buy time. Time to understand what we're dealing with. Time to prepare contingencies. Time to figure out how to present this information in a way that doesn't shatter human civilization's sense of itself. And here's the thing that makes this genuinely tragic. The longer the government keeps this secret, the more time they're also buying for whatever is observing us. The more data they're gathering, the more they're learning about us. We're not in a position of equality. We're not in a position of strength. We're in the position of being watched, studied, and analyzed by something we don't understand. The 3I/Atlas final report apparently contains a section on the cultural and philosophical implications of contact. It apparently argues that humanity needs to be prepared at a fundamental level for the possibility that we're not alone and that we may never be again. That the universe we thought was ours is actually shared with intelligences whose capabilities and intentions remain unknown. That we need to expand our sense of identity from human identity to cosmic identity. Is the government wrong to keep this quiet? Arguably, yes. Does keeping it quiet serve any legitimate purpose? Arguably, yes. Is there a contradiction there? Absolutely. And that contradiction lies at the heart of what it means to be a complex civilization grappling with complex truths. What fascinates me as a scientist is that we're apparently living through the most profound moment in human history, the moment when we confirmed that we are not alone, and most of the world doesn't know it. It's like humanity is standing at the edge of a chasm, looking across at an entire new understanding of existence, but only a few people are allowed to look over the edge. The 3I/Atlas objects, whatever they are, whatever their intentions are, have given us an extraordinary gift. They've given us evidence that the universe is inhabited. They've given us proof that intelligence arises in this cosmos. They've given us a window into what the future might look like, a future where humans interact with non-human intelligences on a cosmic stage. But that gift comes with a price, because now we have to reconsider everything. We have to think about whether our current geopolitical conflicts matter in the context of the cosmos. We have to think about whether our divisions matter if we're being observed by something unified. We have to think about whether we're ready to stop being the only voice in the room. The government isn't hiding the 3I/Atlas report because it's evil. It's hiding it because it's afraid. It's afraid of panic. It's afraid of losing control of the narrative. It's afraid of what happens when people realize they've been observed without consent, studied without knowledge, and potentially judged by standards they don't understand. But here's what I believe: the truth has a way of emerging. The fragments that have already leaked will eventually form a more complete picture. The researchers involved will eventually retire and speak more freely. The classified documents will eventually be declassified. And when that happens, humanity will have to face what it has always known at some level: that we are small, we are not unique, and we are not in control. The question isn't whether the public will eventually know about 3I/Atlas. The question is what humanity will do with that knowledge. Will we continue our petty conflicts? Or will we finally understand that we're all passengers on a small planet in a vast cosmos, and that the differences that divide us are insignificant compared to the fact that we're all human, all earthling, and all part of something far greater than ourselves? The final 3I/Atlas report apparently ends with a single paragraph. No dramatic conclusion, no sweeping statement. Just a simple acknowledgement that the universe has revealed itself to be different than we believed, and that we have a choice about how we respond to that revelation. We can continue to hide from it, or we can embrace it and let it guide us toward a more cosmic perspective on what it means to be human. The government will eventually have to share this information with the world. When they do, we'll finally have the opportunity to grow up as a species. We'll have the chance to understand that our place in the universe is not predetermined, that our future is not written, that we have a voice, even if that voice is currently small and unheard in a cosmos filled with intelligence. The objects detected by 3I/Atlas are still out there. They're still observing. And now, finally, we know they're observing. That knowledge, that awareness changes everything. Not immediately, not dramatically, but gradually, inevitably, it will change how we see ourselves and our world. And when future historians look back on this moment, when they realize that this was the turning point in human history, they'll understand that the government's secrecy, while understandable, was ultimately futile. Because truth, in the end, is always more powerful than secrecy. We are not alone. We never were. And now we know it. What we do with that knowledge will define not just our future, but our place in a cosmos that is far stranger, far more wonderful, and far more full of possibility than we ever dared to imagine. That's the real story the government is hiding. Not a conspiracy, not a cover-up designed to control us, but an acknowledgement that the universe is far richer, far more complex, and far more full of wonder than our current institutions are prepared to admit. And maybe that's okay, because sooner or later we'll be ready. And when we are, the real conversation with the cosmos can finally begin.